Today we have the incredible opportunity to speak with Heidi Chance, a retired undercover detective with over 25 years of law enforcement experience, including 13 years dedicated to investigating child sex trafficking. During her time in the Human Trafficking Unit, Heidi worked on complex cases to rescue victims, take down traffickers, and expose the dark realities of exploitation. Now, through her organization, A Chance for Awareness, she is committed to educating parents, caregivers, and communities about how predators operate and how we can protect our children. Join us on this adventure as we dive into Heidi's firsthand experiences, debunking common myths about trafficking, and learn what practical steps we can take to safeguard and boldly protect our kids from exploitation and trafficking. Thank you for listening. Stay till the end because you won't want to miss it. Hello everyone, welcome back to Storytime with the Bold Advocate. As you know, I am Rebecca Santos, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Detective Heidi Chance. Heidi, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here.
You have quite a specialty. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your expertise?
Yeah, so with working for the police department, I was a school resource officer many years ago. And I just usually like to start with the story of how I even got involved in wanting to investigate human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. So while being a school resource officer, I had a patrol car, and we parked it in front of the school. We couldn't keep the car or take it home, so we had to return it to the precinct every day. And so I had gone into the police station one day and put the keys in, and every time I have to exit to my parking lot where my personal vehicle is, I pass the juvenile holding area, which is an area of rooms that we would hold juveniles who were being interviewed, whether they were a victim of a crime or a suspect of a crime, keeping them away from other adults that are in custody. And so this day that I'm talking about is when I went past those rooms, I peeked in and saw a girl that I had recognized as a former student of mine when she was 7th and 8th grade. So she may have been like 13, 14 years old when I knew her. She recognized me, and so I kind of, poked my head in the door and asked her, "Why are you in trouble?" And she explained that she was under arrest for prostitution. Now this was back, early 2005, 2006, and that is before all of our response to this issue has changed, and we were making arrests, including arrests of juveniles. And so in that, I was just blown away because I had been a police officer already by that time. I was in the academy in 98, so several years, and I knew prostitution was a crime. I thought it was more of an adult problem, and I didn't even know, even being a full police officer with lots of experience, that youth are getting involved in prostitution and being trafficked. And at that time, like I said, it wasn't where we were looking at prostitution as other than just a crime. It wasn't where we were thinking people could be exploited. And so my unique experience is coming from the before and how we treated this problem and what we've evolved to now, where, back then when I first started doing the undercover work, there were only 2 female positions available for officers on the 2 squads because they needed male detectives because they were pursuing prostitutes and arresting them. And now, fast forward to today, the female officers outweigh the male officers because we've recognized the true bad guys are the sex buyers and the traffickers, and you need female undercover officers to be able to pursue those suspects. And so all along the way, I've watched this whole evolution. I've grown and learned myself, and it's really a unique experience I think I have to share, especially to the community, because I do feel it when people are talking about victims who are afraid to talk to the police. And I fall on the sword all the time when I talk to the community. Part of that is because we were arresting them and weren't asking the question that we ask now, which is what can we do to help you get out of this situation and actually help you? And so it's rebuilding relationships and repairing, that's going to take time. And especially when you have traffickers working against us, essentially telling victims they're going to get arrested, which isn't happening anymore, but that was something that happened in the past. So all of that to say, what I'm doing now is obviously working in this field. I'm still working in law enforcement, just for a different agency, and I'm still investigating human trafficking. And then on the side is my mission to reach the public and get information out there to them about the dynamics of human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, so that they can understand the problem and why it's blowing up and becoming such an issue and what we can do to prevent it. So
that's wonderful. I love to see how we as a society, especially law enforcement, has evolved into recognizing that especially minors are not necessarily purposing to put themselves in those situations, but 9 out of 10 times, is that fair to say that that's normally coercion at hand that's leading them, and grooming that's leading them into that lifestyle?
Yeah, so by the definition of what human trafficking is, and human trafficking, people get that confused with human smuggling, so we might as well just start with that. Human smuggling is a crime against the border or the state. That is who the victim is in a smuggling situation. Human smuggling involves an element of consent and transportation from point A to point B. Now, human trafficking is a crime against a person, and that crime is actually two crimes. It's forced sex or forced labor. And when we talk about specifically sex trafficking, it's the commercial sexual exploitation. And I know a lot of people are calling everything human trafficking nowadays because it's a buzzword and it gets attention, but the commercial sexual exploitation is the definition of any sex act in exchange for compensation. It doesn't always have to be money. It could be drugs, buy my hotel room, those kind of things. But that is the definition of commercial sexual exploitation, which is sex trafficking. And sex trafficking and labor trafficking, both for us to prove that this has happened, us as in law enforcement, we're investigating, we have to prove an element of force, fraud, or coercion is going on in that commercial sexual exploitation. Now, force is pretty self-explanatory. That's going to be some kind of violent incident involving injury, visible sign of injury, marks, bruises, those kind of things. The fraud and the coercion are, I think, what you're talking about. Those are harder to explain and harder to prove. The fraud is more explained, better explained. Traffickers are very manipulative, and they spend a lot of the time investing in this promise of a better life. They are flashy on purpose because they want to appear as though they are capable of carrying out this promise, dangling this carrot. I'm going to get you an apartment someday. I'm going to get you to beauty school if that's where you want to go. I'm going to take you shopping. We're going to go travel. I'll take you all over the world. We just have to do this right now. And then the coercion is better explained through the use of the threats. And that's where the threats and the grooming, really. When we talk about grooming, traffickers try to get to know everything about you. You think they're inquiring about you because they want to be in some kind of romantic relationship with you, but really they're trying to learn everything about you so they can flip the switch and use that information against you to threaten you. I need to copyright this phrase, but this is what I always say. It's been my experience that a pimp trafficker, they're the same. It's just two different names for the same person. That's also being confused on Instagram and TikTok and things. A pimp is the most reliable person you will ever meet. If they say they're going to beat you up, they're going to beat you up because they need their victims to believe that what I say is going to happen. Otherwise, these victims wouldn't stick around. And so with those elements all going on, that is how we prove that someone's the victim of sex trafficking.
Wow. Okay. So can you illustrate to us practically, what does it look like you did a great job explaining that for trafficking victims. What does it look like if somebody's willingly being smuggled into America?
So basically, if they're being smuggled into America, and when you say willingly, there's some element of consent. They've paid money to come into the country, those kind of things. Then the crime is smuggling, and that is a crime against the border or the state. So when I'm saying that person could also be a victim of human trafficking, the two things have to happen, either forced labor or forced sex in the form of commercial sexual exploitation.
Does it happen where it starts off as human smuggling, they willingly come, and then it turns into a trafficking situation?
Yes, 100%.
Is that pretty prevalent, would you say?
Yeah. So way I explain what you're describing is in my opinion, there are different types of trafficking. Not types in the sense of, a guerrilla pimp, if you've heard that term or anything like that. I'm talking about more organized trafficking versus individualized trafficking. So more organized trafficking would be what you're describing, like a cartel or a brothel or even massage parlors where they move people all over the United States, traffic them through those entities and those means. Where individualized trafficking is one pimp, maybe 3 or 4 victims, and they're taking all of the money. It doesn't go to an actual organization. It goes to that pimp. Maybe their family's benefiting off of it in some way also, but it's individuals trafficking other individuals. So that's the way I equate those two differences. Both work very similarly, but there is a difference.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. So can you help our listeners understand the different kinds of trafficking?
Yeah. So when we just talked about commercial sexual exploitation, as far as labor trafficking, that is also going on. We don't have a lot of victims of labor trafficking coming forward telling us about their trafficking because they don't realize they're a victim. They're making more money here in this country than they were in their old country, and so they don't even realize there's a problem. Also, there's all the threats of you're going to get deported and sold to another person who's not as nice as I am to you, or all the things, whether it's like forced labor in the form of domestic servitude or like actually out in the fields type of forced labor. We know what's happening, we just don't have people coming forward as much. Even with sex trafficking, we don't have people coming forward as much. A lot of times it's where these victims, unfortunately, are loyal to their trafficker. They think they're in a relationship with them. They may have children in common with them, so they're less likely to come forward. And the way we discover them is, unfortunately, them committing the crime of prostitution out on the street. And in that contact, we discover this exploitation, whether they disclose or we determine it. A lot of times it's a juvenile. They're on the run, they're, out on runaway. They are loyal to this person. They believe the hype about all the promises that were given to them. And so they don't disclose as much as you would think in a rescue. They don't see it as a rescue. They think I'm taking them away from their love of their life. And so a lot of times it's, a fight initially to get them to see how they've been exploited as well. But there's also like familial trafficking, if that's what you mean. Also, familial trafficking is basically being trafficked by a family member or someone that you know. That is definitely also going on, and that's also another situation where a victim may not come forward because they're dependent on that family. The whole family's working together to exploit that person. They're trapped in a situation where they know nothing else. This is how they grew up, this is what they've learned, and this seems normal to them. So they don't realize that it's an actual exploitation.
Yeah, and there's different tactics that people use. It's not necessarily just, a lot of people think trafficking equates to kidnapping, for example, but that, to my understanding, is a small percentage of how trafficking starts. So would you be able to explain some different tactics that people use to have people enter into trafficking?
So if we think about how traffickers find victims, they're looking for vulnerabilities. Whether it's a person who, is in the child welfare system or a kid on runaway, or even a person who's down on their luck and lost their job. The way that I explain this when I speak publicly is I talk about a case study that I usually share at the end of my presentation, where in one case I had 7 victims, 2 juveniles. It was familial trafficking. And in that case, we had a woman in her 40s who was a Department of Corrections officer working at the prison, never been involved in prostitution before, lost her job, fell into a situation where she became employed at a strip club and met the brothel owner, and then brought her 17-year-old daughter into that situation where they were both trafficked by this person. Same case, a 19-year-old, barely an adult. Her mom's a nurse. She's from Scottsdale, a nice affluent area. No, poverty issue, no child abuse, child sexual abuse, anything going on in the home, a well-off family. She's at college. And she meets a guy on Craigslist who wants to take modeling pictures of her, and that guy introduces her to the brothel owner, and her entire life was going one direction, and now she's a resident of the female prison for the next couple of years. So it isn't just the poor kids, it isn't just kids, it isn't just, the kids in child welfare, those kind of things. It could be anyone. It's just a matter of a trafficker seeking you out and discovering your vulnerability and then exploiting that, and that's how they're doing it. Now, as far as where they're finding these victims also is, these kidnappings or an abduction of some kind, like you said, very, very small percentage. That's actually a myth about how this happens. That's not how this really happens. These are everyday interactions that you could be having with this individual at a bus stop, or you met them at a gas station or a food court at the mall, and they start taking an interest in you, and you exchange phone numbers, and then you have conversations where they're flattering you and complimenting you, and that's all part of the grooming, where they're doing that over the phone or text or on a social media app. And then they introduce the idea of, this is what I've got going on, would you like to join me? And it isn't as nice as that. Again, like I said, they're trying to threaten them into this situation a lot of the times as well. But really what it is for youth getting involved is this is the white van, your phone, that's been replaced. And that's where traffickers, if you think about it, have the ability to anonymously contact people, not even just local. As an undercover, I had 7 Facebooks, 4 Instagrams, Meet Me, Tag, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Snapchat, a TikTok. I opened up a Discord, all in undercover personas. And I've had conversations with pimps trying to recruit and groom me. You never know who you're talking to. And I have the luxury of being able to extradite them and have them hold accountable for their actions, recruiting me instead of a live victim. And they've never seen my face, and they've accepted a plea and went to prison for a year. And when doing that investigation, I have to do a warrant for our conversation to preserve it for evidence. And what I found is that the message that was sent to me was copied and pasted hundreds of times a day to women, children, victims, potential victims all over the United States. And it's just, every day. And that's what the internet and social media and these apps have opened this opportunity for traffickers to do that. And these are people that don't have a normal job. Their only job right now, today, is to manage the victims I have right now and look for new ones, because I want to make as much money as possible for as long as possible before I get caught. So that is what's really going on.
Yeah, and I find that there are a lot of youth online. And it seems like every corner of the internet. And so you find that these predators are going even into child accounts like Roblox. We've seen that in the news umpteen times, with Roblox developers even being arrested because of things like online predatory behavior and then even kidnapping children from their home. Obviously, the child goes with them willingly in certain scenarios because this person has lavished them with online Robux or whatever the case is. And then there's one case in particular I'm thinking about, Dr. Rofatnik, his name was. He was a Roblox developer, and he was arrested, and Roblox still awarded him after he took a child from her house. And so I believe that child was between the ages of 9 and 13. And so it's really sad to see how rampant this issue is, not just in America, but around the world. And I tried to stay off of social media as long as I could until I realized I can really use this for good. And so I want to ask you some more second layer questions about that. Parents don't seem to really have a grasp on online safety. What are some tips that you can give them to help them create a safer environment for their kids, that whether they have to use the internet for something or they have the privilege of being online? What tips would you give parents in this day and age?
Yeah, I think it starts with having conversations and having those conversations with them earlier than you would think. When I first started investigating sex trafficking, the national average age of entry into sex trafficking was 15. On today, it's 13, and we've recently rescued a couple of 11 and 12-year-olds. So that means that parents need to talk about these kind of things happening 8, 9, 10 years old. So then that way they can have this growing up, and it's not just a one-time conversation. This is multiple times. And so that's why I wrote my book, because my book is a how-to guide on how to have their conversation. And I modeled it after as being a forensic interviewer. I sit across the table hundreds of times with victims who don't really want to talk to me, but yet I still get them to tell me their story and what's going on. And so I might have a thing or two I know as far as the skill, as far as interviewing and getting to the bottom of the truth. And so I put that into the format of my book and the structure of guiding parents on how to do these conversations. But in my book, I also express, obviously we know some of the simple things you can do, like keeping the devices in an open area where all the family is, limiting their access to it as far as the time that they can be on, and that it has to be monitored by a parent, what they're doing. A rule about passwords and you having access to your child's password and log in. Not only having access, but you as a parent need to check in every now and again, because it isn't that your child is necessarily being deceptive or bad. It could be the other person on the other end telling them to open up a secret account or hide things from a parent. So you need to actually be logging in and checking. You need to be logging in and making sure that someone didn't direct them to change their password on you. You need to be in that device, in that computer as well. As far as some of the stuff I talk about, having them self-police themselves when you're doing these conversations. And what I mean by that is, as a parent, tell them a bad person might ask you to speak in some code, or a bad person might ask you to keep something a secret, or a bad person might tell you, hey, let's delete our conversation, or let's go to a platform like Snapchat where the conversation deletes already. And they're wanting to do those things to protect themselves, because they are going to move into, the further they get into this relationship with this child, where they're going to slowly introduce the idea of, do you like kissing, or even more extreme and take it to the other level where they're talking about nude photos and sharing information that way. So what I'm saying by self-policing, it's where you've already talked to your child about what could happen, and then when it does happen, they heard it from you, so they're going to recognize that. They're going to discontinue talking to that bad guy, and then they're going to tell you about it. And I think that's what's most important, as the goal of these conversations is that outcome. And then I have a chapter in the book, I didn't even show you yet, talk to them. I have a chapter in the book about, if you have that unfortunate situation where someone does have an inappropriate conversation with your child, or your child gets to the point where they share an inappropriate image of themselves with who they think is a peer, but it's really, a 53-year-old guy in another state. What do we do with that? How do we take it down? How do we pursue that suspect? I know a lot of people give advice out there about deleting and blocking. For me, if you want law enforcement to be able to do anything, I need you not to do that. I need to be able to capture that evidence. Otherwise, if you delete it, it's gone, and I don't know what to tell you. I'm not going to be able to prosecute this person because I have to prove that this happened. Not that I don't believe you, but I have to show a jury that it happened. And so a whole chapter in my book about how to interact with the law enforcement officer, especially, we've got some patrol officers out there that, and not anything about them. It's just we've lowered our standards because we can't get people to be police officers these days. And so if you're not satisfied with the interaction with that patrol officer, contact a supervisor, those kind of things. So, but the way that it's supposed to happen, I talk about, and then that way they will, have a better idea of, if I call the police, this is what they're supposed to be doing. And then, maybe giving us permission to take over your child's platform so we can engage with this person, set them up basically, and get them into custody so they can't do this to anyone else. So ultimately, that is what my goal is for the book, is to make sure that we have parents taking on that role, not counting on the school or someone else to have these conversations, but they have the conversation, because by the time I meet you and your kid in an investigative role, the problem's already happened and it's too late. So that's the goal.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I have a list of questions here, and you have an uncanny way of answering the next question before I even ask it. So I'm thankful for your intuitiveness.
Yeah.
One question I get asked a lot: what are the signs that my child is being exploited or trafficked or sexually abused and I don't know? What are the telltale signs that I can look out for?
Yeah. So I have this list on my website. I call it the sex trafficking indicators list, but I think some of these things are also kind of what your question is asking. But basically, obviously, if there's a behavior change where, and it's going to be hard to notice, especially with teen girls, where they may dress more provocatively, or they pack a change of clothes and you find that they are doing that on a regular basis, or a random cell phone, even if it's a cracked screen, busted up phone, they found it. If they have a phone that you didn't provide for them, that you aren't monitoring and able to access, that could potentially be a phone they communicate with, an adult that you don't know. And so that phone has to not be in your house anymore. But as far as the, behavior changes, language is a big part of trafficking. And I have a whole glossary of terminology. It's like 8 pages of, reckless eyeballing. What does that mean? Duck is the term. Blade, track. There's all kinds of terminology. So them changing their behavior, speaking in a certain way, or using lingo that you don't just pick up anywhere unless you got my resource list, that's also an indicator of, they're speaking this way, they've changed their wording, they're around people speaking that way. And those specific terms, are specific to the trafficking world. So that's an indicator all in itself. Obviously, there's, running away is a huge one. If they've run away a couple of times and they've been recovered, where are they being recovered? they're being recovered somewhere near a known area for street prostitution, that's a huge red flag that they might be a victim of trafficking. And that's where, I think Dallas Police Department started with this. It's the high-risk victim model where runaway juveniles, there's a whole criteria, but all of these things that equal a higher risk runaway when they run away again, that the next time they come back in and we've rescued them, they're not going to just talk to the missing persons detective. They're going to talk to another detective who's a forensic interviewer like myself that can talk to them about sex trafficking and see if we can discover what they've been doing on the run, if they've been found anywhere near a street prostitution location. So lots and lots of different indicators, and obviously those are big scary things that I've talked about, but several of those apply to, just getting to know your child, being in their life, being there with them daily. I know we're all super, super busy, but it does mean the outcome of their future if you're a part of their life or if you're not, and what changes in their future. So very important.
What do you think the most powerful thing a parent or caregiver can do to protect their child? I know you talked about talking about perils in advance. Would you say that's the most powerful thing that they could do, or is there something greater than that?
Well, I think obviously having those conversations, being present in their world, being like my son's 23 right now, and I could take his phone out of his hands and look through it. I still have the passcode and access to everything in it. There's, no expectation of privacy under my roof. You have to be, unfortunately, you have to check in on them. You have to be making sure that they're following your rules. You just have to be a parent and not expect someone else to be taking on that role for you at the school or anything. They're not going to be able to do that. They've got testing and grades and all the other things that are put on them that they have to meet a certain standard. They do not have time to take on this role of being involved so much that, parents need to be this, But as far as the devices that you give your child, obviously, I think you talk about Bark Technologies and Gab, G-A-B-B, Gab Wireless. There's also a new app called the Collective app that I can send out a link if your viewers want to get on that. It's a subscription app, but they are, those three entities are all doing what they can to keep parents informed about the latest and greatest, the newest app. There's this new app called Friendly now. That's another one that's kind of, the app itself is trying to encourage kids to think that we're friends, even though these aren't people in real life, just like Facebook and Instagram. And it's, where predators could also create profiles, and it's very dangerous. So being on, the up and up and aware of all these latest and greatest things is what parents need to be doing, informing themselves, educating themselves. And then that way, when they have these conversations, they know where the information is coming from. When their kid comes to them and says, hey, can I get this new app put on the phone? If you don't look into that app, you wouldn't have known. And so those resources are there for parents to educate themselves to say yay or nay.
Excellent. Yeah. What I hear you saying is the greatest present you can give your child is to be present in their world. I love that. Okay, so on a community level, what are some things that you're anticipating could help the law enforcement efforts in the future, and how can the community help? Is there anything that we can do to help law enforcement?
Yes, absolutely. So as far as these indicators, educating yourself on those, education yourself on what human trafficking is, specifically sex trafficking, because that's more prevalent, where to report. So we know the airport, bus stations, they have the National Human Trafficking Hotline that you can call or text. The National Hotline, however, is not a governmental organization. And when I explain this, that means that they're not a mandatory reporter. So if a kid calls them, they don't have to involve law enforcement, and they don't think that they would have to. So if it is where you want some justice for this kid, or you want to get this actually investigated, local law enforcement, or some states like Arizona, I think Texas, Florida, they all have their own state hotline. And also, the national hotline's all the way in DC, so there's a delay. If you report something there, that delay of getting to the right state, to the right city, to the right law enforcement agency could be 2-3 days before it gets to someone who could actually work the complaint. So local law enforcement, the best thing I explain for this is, let's say you're in line in the gas station and you see 3 people in line in front of you, and they're of all different races and ages, with another subject that seems to be kind of controlling them, or they look to that person to, can I buy this or whatever, and it doesn't look like a parent. They're all dressed to attract, and then we didn't even talk about branding, but there is a tattoo that traffickers put on their victims. So if you see 3 people with the same or similar tattoo, that's like a red flag extreme that you have the possible trafficking victims in line in front of you at the gas station. What do you do with that information? Well, if it seems like they're all adults, then you could call the hotline and say, hey, I just saw these people. This is where we were at. They left in this vehicle. By the way, here's the license plate. This is what they look like, description of them. It looks like possible, trafficker and their victims. If it looks like a kid, that would be 911. That would be, we need cops to go pull that vehicle over. I need cops right now. That's what I need you to do as far as the community to report. Otherwise, these people won't be discovered. Because like I said, that victim thinks they're in a relationship with this person. They're not going to call the police, even if they just got beat up yesterday. So we need the community to call. You could call 911, you could call the non-emergency number. They're usually the same dispatcher. She just picks up 2 different phone lines. It's the same thing. It's just the non-emergency number may have been a phone number in place, like in Arizona, that older people will call that first for whatever reason instead of 911. So that's why there's 2 numbers. But ultimately, that's what I would do. If it's, you live in a neighborhood and it's quiet until these new people moved in, and the people who moved in are outside smoking all the time, and the girls are in bikinis, and it's 40 degrees outside, and there's men coming to the house at all hours of the night and staying for 20 minutes and leaving, parking in front of my house. I want to call the police, but I don't want the police car to show up at my house. That would be a call to the hotline. You know what I mean? So that's the difference between crime in progress happening right now, 911, and hey, I want the cops to know about this, but I really don't want anyone else to know that I called. I'm going to give this tip. You don't have to have the patrol car come to your house, ever. You don't. So I think that people don't realize that, and that's why they don't call. But you can give your information over the phone. Just leave your contact information so we can call you in case you witness something else, and that we might, you might not have thought about telling us, and we can ask you another detail. But that's how we get these cases. That's how we get these victims justice, is the community reporting. That's what's huge about that.
Yeah, that's very helpful. A lot of people don't know what to do. They see something, they know it looks suspicious, and they freeze a lot of times. They just don't know. And so my mission is to boldly equip you to boldly protect kids. And so in order to do that, I have people like Heidi on the show, so that way they can share their expertise on how to, 1, protect your kids, but 2, what do you do if you suspect something's going on? How do you respond? We want to be gentle. We don't want to scare them. We want them to confide in us, but that's something that you have to build up. That's not something that happens overnight. And so being able to relationship with your kids, being able to be present in their world at any given time, they should have the confidence to come to you and say, Mom, something's not right. They made me feel uncomfortable. This happened. So Heidi, is there any advice? You've given us so much already, and I thank you so much for that. But is there any advice that you can give parents who just, maybe they didn't do a great job raising their kids, and now they have teenagers and they've had a change of heart and they want to do better, but they've already built a certain kind of relationship with them and they're really worried about their kids. They suspect something's going on. Do you have any suggestions on how they should approach their child in that type of situation?
Yeah, I think using examples of it's someone else when you're trying to actually make a point with them about what you're worried about. Like, if it's a friend of yours that's daughter is running away all the time, and recently she got recovered, and she, all of her clothes were different and they were very sexy and provocative. What do you think about that? Do you think she's got something going on? But really what you're trying to find out is with your child, if they know anyone that's telling them, that they need to dress more sexy or things like that. So just using examples of someone else or an article you read or an Instagram reel you saw as an example to kind of prove the point of what you're actually really trying to talk to them about, and just generate that conversation back and forth about using someone else's experience. I think that's good.
A great piece of advice. Thank you so much for that. So a large amount of my audience are Christians. They're church-going people. And I know that you are no stranger to being aware that there's a heavy issue in religious organizations where they don't report. They are mandatory reporters if they're around children, depending on the state that you live in, but they have a higher percentage of just not reporting. So I've been encouraging my audience where if they suspect something, the burden of proof is not on them. They do not have to prove that abuse or trafficking or exploitation is happening if they suspect it. In the state of Florida, every resident is a mandatory reporter. If I suspect abuse, I have a legal responsibility as a citizen of the state of Florida to report that abuse to the authorities. What encouragement can you give us if we suspect abuse to actually follow through and report it? And before you answer, a lot of people are worried about disrupting a family, about tearing apart a family. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the people that are enabling familial trafficking or the abuse of their children are already tearing apart their family. If anything, by you reporting potential abuse, you are giving a child an opportunity to be in a real loving family. So what encouragement can you give from your perspective to have people who genuinely care but are scared to report? What would you encourage them in?
So as far as being encouraged to report, this may not be the only child that this person's abusing. So a lot of times when we do undercover operations and we do chatting with predators, even when we arrest them for, I'm posing as a 12-year-old and we arrest them for my charge, when we do a warrant for their phone, a lot of times we find child harmful images. We find that they are in the same conversation that they had with me in the undercover interaction they're having with other kids. And, I would not be able to get those kids safe and justice for them if I hadn't come across this person. So if you could, think about the fact that it probably isn't, more often than not, when we're arresting these predators, it's probably not just the one kid that they're doing that to. And so, rest easy that you're probably saving multiple other people when you make that report. Also, Arizona has the Good Samaritan law where you're protected for, in your best knowledge about what's going on, you report, you're protected for, the fact that you reported, and you're not going to be, legally charged with anything because you were just in good faith reporting what you observed and what you saw. Obviously, we don't want to be reporting things that we're making up. It needs to be having some kind of this, observation, or there's some kind of element of follow up for us to figure out a trail, a lead to the ultimate end of getting someone in custody and engaging with them to get them in custody. But just keep in mind, and I think most states have a Good Samaritan law, just like if you observe an accident, if you drive by and there's injuries, if you report it and stop and be a good witness and all those things, no one can sue you for participating in reporting this accident because you're protected by the Good Samaritan law. So I think that's maybe hopefully sets some people at ease as far as getting involved. The other thing that I would mention, though, as far as getting involved is I don't know if you've Googled yourself lately, but your personal information is being sold and sold and sold, and you can go through the effort to get your personal information taken off online, but it's just going to be resold again the next month. So there are services like officerprivacy.com, or I have an affiliate link with deleteme.com, where basically they do that work to keep you protected, to keep your personal information off online. Because obviously as an undercover and as a police officer, I've had traffickers, pimps from prison do a public records request for my personal information. And I don't know if they're writing a book about me or if they're trying to put a hit on me. Bring it on. I'm not scared of you, but that is, something I've personally experienced. Protecting your information. Delete Me, my code is a chance for awareness, and basically it gets you, I think, 20% off of the monthly service, and it's a really good idea to protect your information, especially if you do want to get involved more with a cause like sex trafficking.
Excellent. That I didn't know about Delete Me or officerprivacy.com. I will definitely be using your code there, so everybody check that out. I know when I first started The Bold Advocate on Instagram and I turned it into an LLC, I did search manually by myself for all of my private information online, and now I'm wondering maybe I should go back. So I'm going to use one of those services, and I think you should too, dear friend. And when I got your message. See, this is one of the reasons that I love that I have you on the show. You are so bold, and you're not afraid to say the hard truths to help other people and to bring people to justice. So I love your boldness. Heidi, don't stop being bold. You are saving and rescuing people from horrible evils that are unmentionable, especially on YouTube and Instagram. But what advice can you give us before I let you go today? What advice can you give someone who is caring for someone who was trafficked or exploited?
Yeah, so I think, and I have a personal story with that. I took in one of my victims as my foster daughter for 9 months, and I thought, I'm her rescuer. This is going to be great. I've never been a parent of a 15-year-old at that time. And I think I was patient, but I also, envisioned so much for her, and I may have overwhelmed her because she was beautiful. We were trying out for Miss Teen Arizona. She was musically talented, just like Alicia Keys. She could play the piano by ear and sing. And so I had her in piano lessons. I had her, she said she wanted to get her diploma. So here I am. We're going to get you in an accelerated school. She came to me with 6 high school credits as a sophomore. And so we had a lot of making up to do. So I'm like getting her all this stuff. And I think I overwhelmed her. And I wasn't as patient as I probably could have been because, it's you want to be doing all these things to get them to what my version of what normal would be, or what a person of what I see her would be. But what I don't think I realized is that the trauma that she went through, she was sold between 3 different traffickers. She was held up in an apartment where men would come have sex with her. And I don't think I was as patient and as understanding of that trauma and how she needed more time maybe to ease back into any version of normal. So, I think that that's a huge thing, that slowing down and not thinking, not overwhelming them with all the things that I thought she needed, but maybe listening more to what she actually needed.
That's great advice. I had a situation where someone was horribly abused, and we tried to help her get back on her feet. And I'm very thankful that I thought to myself, am I being too patient? Am I not pushing her enough? But for a couple months, we cooked for her and we cared for her and got her the medical attention she needed, and I struggled with knowing whether or not I was being too patient. Like, should I be pushing her to get a job faster? Should I be pushing her to get her GED? Very similar age. And she got a job in a few months after she was rescued. And she still has that same job to this day. And she's in a healthy relationship now. She's learned what a healthy relationship looks like, so she doesn't subject herself to toxic relationships in the future. And so I'm encouraged, because I was terrified that 6 months later we would be possibly burying her because of how bad the trauma was. And there's always a propensity for people I don't think they want to go back into that lifestyle, but they tend to get drawn back into there because that's what they know, maybe. Do you find it often that people are rescued and then they return back to that lifestyle after being rescued?
Yeah, unfortunately, not her instance. I don't think she ever returned to prostitution, but I've had many investigations involving victims that we've rescued. We're in the middle of trying to go to court. Trying to go to court is a process that could take 1, 2, 3, 5 years, by the way. And so part of, them getting into this normalcy, any version of that, they fall back into meeting a new trafficker because they're vulnerable. They've just come out of this. They're vulnerable. They're maybe going back to the same neighborhoods that they were in before, the same friends, the same interactions with people who are in that element. And yeah, unfortunately, I've had lots of victims return, and it's a matter of, when they get rescued again, they know the outcome of court and all that stuff, and so they don't even want to mess with it. And that's also a dynamic here where we don't even have them prosecuting either trafficker at that point sometimes. So it is a lot of things that need to change and be fixed as far as that goes, for sure.
Well, and I was going to ask too, are there any laws or processes that you would like to see improved to help expedite the justice of predators?
Yeah, so some states, like Arizona, just passed a law about if you traffic a child, you're going to spend life in prison if you're found guilty. That is very helpful because we have a lot of traffickers that are transient and they're coming from other states and they're only here in Arizona 3 or 4 days and then they're on to the next place. And so if we could catch them and hold them and they are trafficking a kid, rescue the child and get them held accountable so that they don't move on and they don't traffic them in another state where it's not as strict. But as far as laws that we could change and make better, in Arizona, if I arrest a prostitute, her 4th conviction in a 5-year period is a felony, she can go to prison and have a felony on her record. If I arrest a buyer, a person purchasing a person for sex, typically men, 99% men, I've never arrested a female buyer, but anything could happen. But these men, they'll go to jail, we'll tow their car for 30 days, they're gonna have to tell their wife what happened to the car. But the next time they get arrested, they'll see 10 days, they'll see 15 days, they'll see 60 days, 90 days, but there isn't the equivalent of a felony for a buyer right now in this state. And I think that because we know this is a supply and demand issue, and the buyers are the ones demanding the people to purchase for sex, why do we not have stricter punishments for buyers who are contributing to this whole problem in the first place?
Yeah, if
So
the demand
that is definitely needed.
Yeah, if the demand issue is never addressed, it's always going to be a problem and it's always going to increase, especially with porn being so rampant and accessible. There was just an arrest last week out of Clay County, Florida, of a government official named Harrison Ted Clark, who he said that the reason he tried to purchase or meet a 14-year-old boy for sex after contacting a undercover detective like yourself online was because he had a porn addiction that grew out of control. And so I find very often when I'm doing these deep dives and telling people's stories that a lot of times it happens because they were either abused as a child or they themselves have a porn addiction. Do you think that we should tighten the laws around pornography in America?
Yeah, if you ever fly Delta Airlines, they actually hosted the film Wake Up. They have an Instagram called the official movie Wake Up. And I've spoken to the director because there is one part of that film that they portray a police officer as a trafficker, which isn't helpful. And she said it's based on true stories, but not completely true. But the whole rest of the film, I still recommend it because it shows not only one trafficker and how they exploited 2 different girls, one from a richer neighborhood and one from child welfare, and how quickly that happened and how in different ways that happened. Really good depiction of that. But then also the sex buyer situation where you have a family man praying at dinner, eating with the family, then going and locking himself in the bedroom and watching porn. And then that addiction grows into the point where he calls a prostitution ad and goes and visits a girl on a date. And that happens to be a juvenile and he gets caught. And then his marriage falls apart. He attempts to commit suicide. All the things that are a reality of the final outcome of this addiction to porn. And all of it started because of that access. And with that access of other platforms like OnlyFans and Patreon and these other platforms where it feels more real because it's you interacting through an email with this person and they make a video for you. That is absolutely contributing to this issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the OnlyFans culture that's exploded over recent years is absolutely romanticizing human trafficking to a degree. We saw, I think it was Bonnie Blue, I think her name is. She's an OnlyFans model that just had sex with over 1,000 men in less than 12 hours. That's literally romanticizing human trafficking. I know that women are not typically buyers, right? Less than 0.1% of women are buyers, but women are still participating in human trafficking. Can you help us understand typically what you or others have seen women partake in when it comes to the trafficking of others?
Yeah, so another term for it is the bottom, which the bottom is actually the top girl. That is potentially another victim that has been with the trafficker so long that they're so loyal and deep into this situation that they become an assistant to the trafficker, basically. They will recruit, they will help groom, they will teach them how to do a date, how to tell if it's law enforcement. they'll arrange dates for them, they'll transport them, they'll put vehicles and rentals and things in their name to kind of hide the identity of the trafficker. They'll carry out punishment. Also, as far as beating up another one of the girls for violating a rule of the traffickers, those kind of things, collect money, all of those things. So unfortunately, lots of those individuals that are the role of the bottom actually move into the role of being a trafficker eventually as well. And there is, that happening as part of this situation.
Wow. Okay, so I know I only have you for a few more minutes, so I want to get the most out of our time together. But how can we identify these type of relationships between the bottom women and the prostitutes?
Well, the way that law enforcement identifies it is, when we're doing the financial investigation or when I'm interviewing a victim and they're describing the dynamic of, it was this person who collected the money and then I saw them give it to the trafficker, those kind of statements that help us. Or I have had some cases where the bottom participated in a threesome with one of the child victims. And at that point, they're getting charged with child sex trafficking as well, or sex misconduct with a minor as well, because you had sex with a kid. And it's part of this family dynamic and them all being in a relationship together, but it's still exploitation. And so that is how we're discovering that relationship and what's going on there. I don't know that would be out in the open for people in the community to realize, unless you witnessed a bottom carry out some kind of punishment, slap a victim or those kind of things in front of you that you could witness and report about.
Yeah, it's easier. I talk a lot about grooming on my podcast and on YouTube and Instagram because a lot of people just don't know what grooming is. They don't know what the pattern of grooming is. They don't know how to identify it and to address it if they do suspect it. But a lot of times, I would say 99% of probably closer to 100% of the time, if someone sees a suspicious behavior between a woman and a girl or a woman and a teenager, they just usually will think that, oh, that's just their mom or that's just their sister or that's just a friend giving her a hard word or something of that sort. Are there any kind of like traits or characteristics that we can look for, whether it be, controlling, like the bottom girl controlling a teenage girl, for example, her whereabouts, her identity, her payment methods? Is there anything we can look out for besides that?
Well, like if you are a healthcare professional and you maybe work in the emergency room and in comes this victim who's got a injury of some kind that you're treating, and then another person who happens to be another female is there, and they're kind of controlling the situation, like where's the phone? They're holding the phone. They have the ID belongs to this victim. They're speaking for them. Like if I'm asking you a question and someone else is answering the question for me, that's why police separate people. That's the whole reason why we put you over here and you over here, so that I can get to the bottom of the truth and you don't put your stories together. So, that's definitely a huge red flag that I teach on when I present to healthcare professionals, is someone speaking for someone else. That is an indicator as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. And then I think last question I think I could just ask you question after question for hours. Last question. Okay. So I had a situation where I was a manager of a really nice restaurant in downtown Jacksonville, Florida. And in walked a gentleman, older, very scruffy, kind of rough around the edges, and two teenage girls. The teenage girls had super high heels on, very short skirts. They didn't look related. One was of one ethnicity and another was another ethnicity. Well, the man was a completely different ethnicity. And immediately my red alarm started going off. And there was a moment where the girls were by themselves. I think the man stepped out to smoke a cigarette. And I said, I think this is my only opportunity to talk to them. And so I went up to the table and I said, hey, how's everything going this evening? And they seemed very paranoid, but still very giddy at the same time. And I thought, well, that seems manufactured. That doesn't seem normal. That seems like they might be on something. And I asked them, I said, is that your cousin? Or they said, no, that's our daddy. And I said, oh, big red flag, right? I said, oh, that's your dad? And I said, y'all he doesn't look old enough to be your dad. And they're like, yeah, that's our daddy. And I was like, okay. So immediately, I noticed he was starting to come back. I said, "Are you girls safe? Do you feel safe?" And they started like kind of getting beside themselves. And so I stepped away from the table. I could see he was approaching. I didn't want him to suspect anything. And I immediately went and I told one of my servers to contact the human trafficking line for the state of Florida. And for some reason, I thought that people were going to come busting through the doors, and that did not happen. And sadly, they left before it seemed that anybody came to address the situation. So it's I think people, when they have that opportunity to talk to the person that they believe is being abused, they don't know what to say. Should they even approach them? So my question to you is, if you have an opportunity to approach someone that you believe is being trafficked, do you approach them? And if so, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I think the way that you handled that was amazingly well, especially asking if they're safe. It's a hard thing to say this equals this, because a lot of times when even I've had contact with it, I know that they're a trafficking victim, but if they don't disclose and tell me, I can't go off of anything. And then we meet again and I know, but they don't say anything. You know, that continually happens sometimes. And I think the way that you handled it is good. Definitely the hotline, like I said, it's for that instance, but if you were expecting like a response right now, that would be the 911 or the non-emergency number of crime stop. I would say if one of those girls looked like a kid, that would be when you would call. It doesn't hurt. You're not bothering us. They might label it a check welfare. But as far as being a good witness, if you could maybe covertly, without them seeing, or if your restaurant has video surveillance, maybe preserve that so that we can have video footage of them together. Maybe have one of the servers go out to the parking lot and get a license plate of the vehicle. You know, not that you're going to be, I don't want you to put yourself in harm's way or anything, but if you could, if it was a possible thing that you could get a copy of their license plates, and in that way we could do follow-up. Even the hotline will collect that information and pass it along. But definitely, I think what you did was great. I think that, you know, recognizing and then, you know, understanding that your suspicions, I mean, the way you were describing it, my bells were going off. That sounds like exactly the way you interpreted what was going on, that it could be a trafficking situation. Again, the term daddy, part of the terminology. I think that, you know, you did exactly right in that. And I think if someone followed that advice and followed the path that you went on as far as asking if they're safe, you know, a lot of times we have little cards that we pass out, but sometimes if you pass out a card and let's say it says law enforcement anything, that victim, if they get searched and they're found with that card, they get beat up over that. And so you don't want to put them into that situation. So we used to have like a nail salon card that had the emergency number on it. So then that way it looked like a nail salon card or a hair card, and it was unassuming for the trafficker, if it was found on them, that it was a detective or that they had contact with law enforcement anyway. But I don't expect you to have those, you know, that you carry around with you. But I think
it might be something I look into, though.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
It wouldn't hurt to come up with some additional resources like that as you are traveling about and you see something suspicious and you have that opportunity to sneak in to have a conversation or hand off something to someone. I think that is a neat tactic to use. All right, Heidi, I have overstayed my welcome today. Anything you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention my book again, Talk to Them. It's on Amazon. I'm also having this translated in Spanish, so that I can reach, you know, more and more parents. And I have a female officer that I'm supporting that's going to translate it for me and also do an audiobook version in Spanish for me. So then that would be available out there. That's hopefully going to happen in April. And then I have my online human trafficking class. It's called The Power of Awareness. And so it's an online, take it as, you know, at your own pace class that really goes through, you know, the evolution of law enforcement, you know, more in depth of how victims fall into this situation, more about buyers and their role in all of this, and then the traffickers' role. And then I also talk about how to get involved, not only reporting, but how to get involved in the fight, and without being a vigilante, because we've got a lot of that going on. You know, a lot of people are inspired and want to get involved, but most states have a statute that it has to be a sworn police officer who observes it. For example, if you see someone speeding on the freeway and you call the police, unless the motor officer observes that speeding, I can't just pull over that vehicle if I find it and charge them with speeding, because I have to observe it. That's the same thing as, people doing their own little undercover operations to catch a predator. If the law enforcement isn't present engaging with that suspect, we have rules of evidence, we have rules of entrapment, all kinds of things that we have to abide by to be able to successfully prosecute someone and get someone justice. None of that can happen if you're being a vigilante and doing that on your own. So that is not the way to go. If you want to support law enforcement, you can do that in many, many ways. There is what I usually try and have organizations do is when I worked for Phoenix Police Department, we had backpacks of different size undergarments and like leggings and hoodies and flip-flops and underwear and things in different sizes and toiletries and backpacks of different sizes in our car, so that when I'm in the moment of a rescue and I have a victim I'm trying to interview and they're across the table from me and they're worried about their hairbrush and their makeup and stuff back at the hotel because that's the only property that their trafficker allowed them to have. And if I can offer them something in the moment of the rescue that's just theirs, that they can leave with, all theirs, that goes huge for the rapport building, for my ability to get more details out of them as far as what happens so that I can ultimately get them justice and take this person into custody. So the community bringing that to the law enforcement agency, to the family advocacy centers where these interviews are happening, those donations and things are huge. If you wanted to get involved, a lot of the situation we have is a lot of states don't have placement. We are okay with placement maybe for adults, not so much for kids, and especially not for boys in Arizona specifically. So creating a placement where you open up a home or a shelter of some kind that can take in these types of victims and offer them immediate services. We have organizations that do the tattoo removal, where they'll either redo the branding tattoo into some other form of a tattoo, or they'll do the laser treatments to remove. And they need money, they need funding to donate to those organizations to be able to pro bono do that for victims of trafficking, all kinds of things you can do to get involved. So I talk about all of that in my Power of Awareness class. And then I'm releasing next month my modern day situational awareness class, where I go more in depth about, being situationally aware so that you yourself or your family don't become victims of crime. I talk about, prepping your house, crime prevention through environmental design. I was a community action officer before I ever even went to school resource officer. So, burglary prevention, those kind of things. So lots and lots going on in my world, but that's all on my website, achancephorawareness.com. And obviously we met on Instagram. So I have my A_chance_for_awareness Instagram page where I post a lot about tips and things going on in the world and education about all these issues.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm looking at your website now. I'm going to put a link for your website on my website. I'm going to create a little landing page for you. It's going to be a permanent fixture on there. So I also have a course, the Bold Child Advocate course. There's a section in there on human trafficking. I'm going to be putting this video in that course for our viewers. And anybody that takes that course will then be able to do a deeper dive into human trafficking and situational awareness on Heidi's website. So be on the lookout for that on my website. That should be done, I would say, by the end of this week. I should be able to have that done. Okay. And then this video should be released, I would say, by next week, Lord willing. But I will keep you posted on that. And I'll probably edit this section out of the video just to give you a heads up. But thank you everyone for listening. Tune in next time for Storytime with the Bold Advocate. Go check out Heidi's website, achancephorawareness.com. Use all the resources, buy her book, read it, talk to your kids, prepare them for the hopefully not the inevitable, but the fact is that 1 in 5 kids are solicited to sexually online, 1 in 3 girls are sexually abused before they're 18, and approximately 1 in 4 boys before they're 18. So the fact is that if you have 5 kids, the chances are high that one of them will be contacted inappropriately. Prepare your kids for that time, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we're here to boldly equip you to bully, protect kids. Go check out Heidi. Use the code that she gave. Well, go check out Heidi's website. She has recommended products, classes, courses, books. She has this thing loaded. There's no excuse for you not to get involved in preventing and responding to human trafficking. Until next time, go protect a kid.